Most people think wealth is built by making the right moves. I have long believed it is just as often destroyed by saying too much about those moves before they have time to compound. That may sound like a small distinction. It is not. I have spent my life watching people study business, markets, taxes, valuation, and all the visible mechanics of money. They learn how to read an income statement. They learn what makes a company durable. They learn how to allocate capital. Some even learn how to buy a dollar for 50 cents. But many of them never learn one of the most important lessons in the whole game. A fortune can leak long before it is lost. It leaks through ego. It leaks through loose talk. It leaks through people who discover too early what you have, what you plan to do, where your edge comes from, what your children think they are entitled to, and what sort of applause your soul has become addicted to. I have seen more money weakened by disclosure than by bad arithmetic. That is not because arithmetic does not matter. It matters a great deal. But arithmetic is only one half of money. The other half is human nature. Human nature is what turns a number into envy, a plan into resistance, an advantage into imitation, an inheritance into paralysis, and a good deed into vanity. If you do not understand that half of the equation, you can make the right financial decisions and still end up living inside the wrong incentives. That is a costly mistake. When I was younger, I learned something simple. The world is not neutral toward visible success. People like to imagine it is. They like to say they are happy for the man who prospers. They like to tell themselves they celebrate the friend who buys well, earns well, builds well, and wins well. Sometimes they do. Often they do not. More often, they reinterpret your success through the lens of their own insecurity. That is not a moral lecture. It is just observation. The moment your wealth becomes visible, the social pricing around you changes. That is where the trouble begins. Most people think a net worth number is merely private information. I think it is more like a chemical that changes the nature of every relationship it touches. When others do not know your number, they interact with you as a person. Once they think they know your number, they begin interacting with you as a balance sheet. They may not even realize they are doing it. A dinner bill becomes a test. A vacation suggestion becomes a negotiation. A favor becomes an expectation. A request becomes morally loaded. A refusal becomes evidence against your character. That is how wealth begins to leak. You do not lose money all at once. You lose something more valuable first. You lose ordinary human pricing. You lose the right to be treated as a peer. The people around you start performing an invisible audit. They notice what you spend on. They notice what you refuse to spend on. They decide what generosity you now owe. They decide what level of comfort you should underwrite. They decide that your prudence is stinginess, your boundaries are arrogance, your caution is selfishness. The number changes the room. That is why I have always preferred to let the room underestimate me. Underestimation is cheap. Visibility is expensive. I learned this very early in investing. If I am building a position in a company, I do not begin by announcing it to the world. I do not turn accumulation into a performance. I do not light a torch and invite the crowd. I buy quietly. I move slowly. I let the opportunity remain an opportunity for as long as possible. There is a simple reason for that. The moment the market knows what you are doing, the market begins moving against you. The seller wants more. The imitator rushes in. The commentator adds noise. The price loses innocence. What had been a clear path becomes crowded. Silence protects economics. That lesson applies far beyond the stock market. It applies to a career change. It applies to a business acquisition. It applies to a side venture. It applies to a major relocation. It applies to any serious move that still needs time, room, and privacy in order to become real. Too many people speak before the thing has earned the right to be spoken about. That is one of the most underrated financial errors in modern life. They confuse expression with progress. They say the plan out loud because talking creates the warm feeling of momentum. They tell friends, post hints, broadcast ambition, sketch the outline of a future that has not yet been built, and mistake that social energy for actual execution. What they have really done is spend part of the reward before the work is complete. I do not like spending rewards early. The market punishes that habit. So does life. A plan that remains private can still grow. A plan that becomes social too early must now fight through opinion, criticism, envy, pressure, sabotage, and the subtle laziness that arrives when the ego has already tasted public approval. That is why many announced plans die. They did not die because the plan itself was weak. They died because the owner leaked conviction, leaked energy, leaked strategic advantage, and then wondered why the final result felt weaker than the original dream. Silence is not passivity. Silence is insulation. It allows an idea to harden before the weather hits it. I have never admired people who narrate their strategic map in real time. A CEO does not improve his competitive position by sending his whole playbook to the rival. A disciplined investor does not improve his entry price by publicizing his buying schedule. A family does not improve its internal peace by exposing every future dollar before the structure has matured. And yet millions of people do the equivalent every day. They tell the world what they are building. They tell the world how much they have. They tell the world what they are about to buy, launch, sell, inherit, give away, or change. Then they are surprised when the world starts touching it. That surprise is naive. Money attracts attention, but not all attention is equal. Some attention is admiration. Some attention is opportunism. Some attention is resentment. Some attention is idle curiosity. Some attention is a quiet recalculation of what can now be asked of you. That last category destroys more peace than people realize. Let me put it plainly. When people around you believe you are roughly where they are, they still allow you the dignity of limits. When they believe you have far more than they do, your limits become negotiable in their minds. Your budget is no longer your business. It becomes part of their moral philosophy. They start deciding what someone like you should be willing to do. This is why I dislike discussing personal net worth with almost anyone, not because money is shameful, not because success must be hidden out of fear, but because once a precise number enters a relationship, the relationship has to work harder to remain clean. Very few relationships survive more information better than they survive less. A useful amount of ambiguity protects human equality. I value that protection. The same principle governs plans. A plan is a fragile asset in its early life. It does not merely need intelligence. It needs a controlled environment. It needs freedom from random commentary. It needs the right to fail, pivot, deepen, or vanish without having already become part of someone else's expectations. That right disappears the moment you broadcast too early. When you say, "I am leaving my job to start a firm," the room changes. When you say, "I am buying a property," the room changes. When you say, "I am moving capital into a new business," the room changes. When you say, "I have found a special angle in this market," the room changes. It is not just that people may criticize you. Criticism is the simplest problem. The harder problem is that you have now invited their fears, their projections, their private disappointments, and their subconscious need to drag your confidence back into familiar territory. A man trying to do something uncommon should be very careful how much common opinion he lets into the process. The crowd is not always wrong, but the crowd is often too slow, too emotional, too envious, or too invested in its own self-image to be trusted with your emerging edge. That word matters, edge people. Use it casually, but I do not. An edge is not just information. It is not just cleverness. It is not just secret knowledge. A true edge is any repeatable asymmetry that allows you to act with better odds than the average participant. It may come from patience, it may come from temperament, it may come from research, it may come from access, it may come from a special ability to understand a business more clearly than others do. Whatever its source, the rule is the same. An edge loses value when it becomes. That is why the finest businesses in the world protect what makes them economically unusual. The formula is not posted on the door. The supplier terms are not distributed for entertainment. The internal decision tree is not offered to the public merely because transparency feels virtuous. Durable advantage almost always depends on some form of controlled information, controlled discipline, or controlled behavior that weaker operators cannot easily copy. Individuals should learn the same lesson. If you have discovered a way of operating that genuinely compounds results, do not hand it out carelessly just because you crave recognition. Recognition is a poor exchange for advantage. I know many people who claim they want to help others by telling everyone exactly how they make money. Sometimes that is true. Sometimes it is merely vanity wearing a charitable mask. They want to look wise. They want to be admired for understanding something difficult. They want social status in the language of generosity. There is a cost to that. If your edge is real, broad exposure invites imitation. If imitation is easy, excess returns fall. If excess returns fall, the very thing that made you valuable becomes thinner. You may still get applause, but applause does not compound the way an undisturbed edge compounds. This is one reason I have never equated loudness with mastery. The loudest operator in money is often the one with the shallowest moat. A man who truly owns a good moat does not need to stand on it shouting all day. He lets the moat do its work. Most people miss this because they confuse personal branding with economic durability. They think influence is a substitute for compounding. It is not. Influence can be monetized, of course, but even influence has the same problem if handled poorly. The more of yourself you sell for immediate attention, the more pressure you create to keep selling yourself rather than building quietly. That path exhausts people. A quieter path builds assets. Nowhere is bad disclosure more dangerous than inside a family. Markets are impersonal. Families are not. That makes the consequences of disclosure more emotional, more subtle, and sometimes more devastating. A great many parents imagine that sharing the exact size of an eventual inheritance is a form of honesty. They think clarity will create security. They think early disclosure proves love. They think letting the children count the future money will remove confusion. I have rarely found that to be wise. Children do not merely hear a number. They absorb a future identity. If the number is large enough, it can start changing behavior years before any will is executed. It can reduce appetite for struggle. It can weaken urgency. It can create unspoken dependency. It can transform ambition into waiting. Waiting is poisonous. A child who suspects that enough money is coming later may stop building the internal muscles needed to deserve any money at all. He may not do this consciously. That is what makes the danger so serious. He simply becomes less hungry. He takes fewer productive risks. He delays adulthood in elegant language. He mistakes expected rescue for security. He becomes older without becoming stronger. That is not inheritance. That is corrosion. I have always preferred a different principle. Leave your children enough so they can do anything. Do not leave them so much or tell them so much that they can do nothing. That distinction is civilization in miniature. Capital should not merely transfer comfort. It should preserve character. If the money arrives in a way that weakens the recipient before it arrives, then the money has already done damage while still sitting on your side of the ledger. That is absurd, but it happens all the time. There is a second family danger here, and it is every bit as ugly. The moment siblings know, or think they know, how an estate will be divided, present relationships can become negotiations about future money. Love is reinterpreted. Attention becomes strategy. Caregiving becomes evidence. Every difference in likely allocation starts to feel like a judgment about worth. One child becomes the favorite, another becomes the problem, and every holiday dinner acquires a hidden accounting department. I have seen families do emotional litigation years before a legal document had any reason to matter, all because too much was said too early. Estate silence is not cruelty, it is governance. Tell your family you have taken care of things. Tell them they will not be abandoned. Tell them you have thought through the structure, but do not turn your living years into a spreadsheet negotiation. Money is heavy enough after death. It does not need to sit at the dinner table while you are still alive. I understand the temptation to overshare here. Many people want peace, and they think full transparency is peace. In reality, premature transparency often destroys peace by introducing a set of comparisons that no human nervous system handles elegantly. A family can survive uncertainty. It often cannot survive explicit future ranking. And then there is the final form of disclosure, the one people least suspect is costly, because society rewards it so loudly, moral disclosure. By that I mean the urge to broadcast your virtue, your charity, your generosity, your pain, your burden, your saintliness, or your injuries in exchange for social confirmation. I have never trusted that urge. My father taught me something I have never forgotten. The world offers two scorecards. One is outer. One is inner. The outer scorecard asks whether other people approve. The inner scorecard asks whether you approve. A man who lives by the outer one becomes easy to purchase. A little applause changes his behavior. A little criticism disturbs his equilibrium. A little public recognition can push him to do the right thing for the wrong reason. That is dangerous. The same ego that makes a man brag about his wealth will often make him advertise his goodness. Both habits come from the same hunger. He wants the room to confirm his value. He wants identity from witnesses. He wants his private balance to be settled publicly. That is no way to build a stable life. I would rather help someone and leave no public residue. I would rather absorb a difficulty without turning it into a theater. I would rather give quietly, move quietly, build quietly, and let the internal ledger stay clean. Why? Because every public performance of virtue invites two forms of decay. First, it tempts you to do good for the feeling of being seen doing good. That degrades motive. Second, it trains your character to rely on external applause. That degrades strength. The same is true in reverse with grievance. People who constantly broadcast their injuries may receive attention, but they also train themselves into a kind of dependence. The identity of the wounded person becomes rewarding. The habit of exposure becomes self-reinforcing. Soon they do not simply have problems, they perform problems. I do not admire performed weakness. I do not mean that suffering should never be shared with the right people. Wisdom requires counsel. Friendship requires honesty. Marriage requires emotional truth. But there is a large difference between speaking to those who have earned intimacy and spraying your internal life into the marketplace. The marketplace does not heal. It prices that sentence is worth remembering. When you expose too much of your money, people price you. When you expose too much of your plan, people crowd you. When you expose too much of your edge, people copy you. When you expose too much of your family structure, People negotiate you. When you expose too much of your virtue or weakness, people convert your soul into theater. This is why silence has always seemed to me less like repression and more like capital preservation. Not every silence is wise, of course. Some silences are cowardice, some are dishonesty, some protect abuse or fear. I am not defending those. I am speaking of strategic silence. The kind that protects compounding, the kind that protects relationships from contamination, the kind that protects children from passivity, the kind that protects initiative from premature evaluation, the kind that protects the inner scorecard from the corruption of endless applause. There is a discipline in that kind of silence. It is not glamorous. It does not trend. It does not make you look important at lunch. It does not attract the restless admiration of people who mistake disclosure for confidence. But over a long life, I have found that almost everything important benefits from some privacy while it is still becoming what it is supposed to be. A marriage benefits from this. A business benefits from this. An investment benefits from this. A fortune benefits from this. A character benefits from this. The modern world pushes in the opposite direction. It wants exhibition. It wants live narration. It wants identity performed in public. It wants every milestone announced before it has matured. It wants the world to know not only what you have done, but what you intend to do, what you deserve, what you suffered, and what you gave away. I think that world extracts a hidden tax. The tax is leakage. Leakage of focus, leakage of advantage, leakage of dignity, leakage of peace, leakage of compounding. People notice only the obvious forms of loss. They notice the bad investment, the ugly loan, the lawsuit, the extravagant lifestyle, the failed business. They pay less attention to the more sophisticated leaks, the conversation that changed a friendship, the announcement that weakened execution, the shared formula that killed an edge, the disclosed estate plan that turned children into competitors, the public hunger for praise that made private virtue impossible. Those leaks are real, and because they are real, the opposite behavior matters. A man who wishes to build something durable should become selective about disclosure. He should not lie. He should not posture. He should not live in fear, but he should understand that some of the strongest walls in a financial life are built from what he refuses to expose. I have often said that temperament matters more than IQ in investing. The same is true here. You do not need genius to practice strategic silence. You need restraint. You need the ability to let reality ripen without turning it into a performance. You need the confidence to build without witnesses. You need the patience to let the result become visible only after its roots are deep enough to survive attention. That patience is rare. It is also profitable. Many people want to look rich. Fewer want to stay rich. Many people want to look wise. Fewer want to keep an edge. Many people want to be seen as generous. Fewer want to preserve a clean soul. Many people want their family to feel secure. Fewer are willing to structure security in a way that preserves hunger, character, and peace. Those differences are the whole game. If I had to reduce this subject to one sentence, it would be this. The loudest people in money are usually protecting an ego. The quietest people are often protecting an empire. I do not mean an empire in the theatrical sense. I mean the real one, a well-defended financial life, a network of relationships not distorted by exact numbers, a plan protected from random interference, an advantage not diluted by applause, children not softened by future certainty, a conscience not rented out to the crowd. That empire is built in quiet ways. It compounds in quiet ways too. Every time you decline to reveal a net worth number, you preserve ordinary human pricing. Every time you keep an unfinished plan inside the workshop a little longer, you preserve execution. Every time you protect a real edge from cheap recognition, you preserve excess return. Every time you refuse to turn inheritance into family theater, you preserve character and peace. Every time you do good without an audience, you preserve the inner scorecard. Those preservations compound, and once you begin to see them that way, silence no longer feels like deprivation. It feels like discipline. It feels like margin. It feels like one of the most underestimated forms of wealth defense there is. I have never believed that money alone makes a man strong. Money reveals him. If he is vain, it gives him more ways to perform. If he is weak, it gives him more opportunities to leak. If he is wise, it gives him more things worth protecting. A wise man learns this before the leakage becomes obvious. He learns that not every truth belongs in the room. He learns that privacy is not the enemy of success. He learns that if the thing is real, it does not need to be announced too soon. And he learns that the surest way to keep compounding working in his favor is not merely to buy well, save well, or invest well. It is to stop giving the world advance access to what has not yet finished becoming valuable.